Soybean broadleaf herbicides. You know, Darren, just a few years ago, this was pretty easy because basically the one and only choice was Roundup. Or wait, there was more Roundup. That was the other option.
Well, you know, post-emerge, I guess it's hard to argue with from an economic standpoint if Roundup's working and you can kill all your weeds for $2 or $3 an acre. It's tough to pick a $10 or $15 herbicide to mix with it. So I don't blame farmers at all for using what works and what's economical for their farm to control weeds. But the point right now, Brian, is Roundup just isn't working on all the weeds that it used to. It's still working on most of them, but there are a few troublesome weeds like Palmer pigweed, tall water hemp, giant ragweed.
Let's get into that. So that's basically what it's come down to is Roundup resistant weeds is what we're worried about. Now certainly you could switch to Liberty Link soybeans and then spray Liberty and that should control most things.
That's just too easy, Brian. That's too easy. We want to have it complicated. We want to mix several products together, right?
No, we have absolutely zero desire to do that, but unfortunately, if you've got multiple Roundup resistant weeds out there, that's where you run into problems. So the most common ones, like Darren mentioned, Palmer pigweed and water hemp for sure. Those are probably the worst ones you can have. Then there's also ragweed, common ragweed and giant ragweed. Lamb's quarters may or may not be technically resistant, but Roundup really struggles to control that one. We've got wild buckwheat. We got a few others.
Don't forget kochia. Kochia is really getting tough to control in the Dakotas and Montana, and that area is growing as well. So, and the other thing, Brian, that really goes unmentioned is we've been relying on products like Roundup and Liberty now. Neither one of those has any residual control.
Right.
So when we're talking about adding these other products in, a lot of guys would say, well, I'm going to have to spend more money than I used to. Yes, but you are going to get some residual control and you're getting a different site of action attacking those weeds.
You are, but I mean, that residual is a little bit overrated late in the season because honestly, crop canopy is the very best weed killer that there is. So if we've got good crop canopy up and going, then I'm not that terribly worried about it. But to your point, I mean, yes, we can get some residual out of some of the post-emerge herbicides, but let's talk first about lamb's quarters. The very best thing post-emerge is going to be harass, which is a generic version of the old Harmony SG or Harmony GT. But anyway, this harass, you're only going to spend roughly $1 an acre, and it's very good on lamb's quarters. Problem is, no residual.
Well, and the other problem is, Brian, it doesn't get a whole lot of other weeds. I mean, yeah, there are a few other weeds, but I mean, as far as the major weeds out there, like take, for example, Palmer pigweed or tall water hemp, guess what? They're resistant to those ALS type products and it does nothing for those
Okay, so let's talk about those two weeds, Palmer pigweed and water hemp. The very best thing post-emerge would be Flexstar. Now, you have to be a little careful with Flexstar depending on where you're at in the country. It's not even labeled in western North Dakota, for example, because of carryover concerns. In other areas, like where we farm in eastern South Dakota, you might only be able to use 12 or 16 ounces per acre, and in certain areas of the country, you could even use more.
Maybe, Brad.
Yeah, we're always scared about those products that have too much residual.
I'm nervous about the residual and the carryover, and yes, a little bit of residual is good, but those high rates, I'm pretty scared about that, especially if we end up with dry conditions, like 2012. All of a sudden, we were dry over much of the country, and guys are like, well, I used this really pretty late in the season. Do you think I'll be okay? I don't know. If you don't get normal rainfall afterwards, who knows if you're going to be fine. The other thing is you can find some of that Flexstar type chemistry in some pre-emerge herbicides, and if you're using those, all of a sudden, hey, you can only use it once per year, and that's going to stop you from using it post-emerge.
With Flexstar, though, it is very good on Palmer pigweed and water hemp. We will usually only recommend a 12-ounce use rate because of the concern with carryover. But here's the problem. If you don't use Flexstar, if you're not able to use Flexstar, the next best thing is Cobra. And I'll just tell you from years ago as an agronomist, I always used to tell guys, look, if you're going to use Cobra, take a vacation for a couple of weeks because you're not going to want to look at those soybeans for a while. You may think that you killed the beans.
Well,
that's not good.
Here's the thing. Let's just start with this. With Flexstar or with Cobra, guess how tall it'll kill pigweeds? Maybe 2 to 4 inches tall. If your pigweed is a foot tall, it's too late. Chances are you're not going to bring it down with either of those products and you're in big trouble out in your field. So that's been the real challenge with Roundup resistant weeds now and ALS resistant weeds before them is by the time you figure out that you've got resistance, it's already too late to deal with it. So just plan that your weeds are resistant. Deal with them like they are. Don't just rely on Roundup or just rely on Liberty anymore. Mix something else with it, heat that mix up, and make sure you're taking care of those weeds the first time you go through. And then like Brian said, do everything you can do to make sure crop canopy happens quicker. That way you've got crop canopy to hold down any weeds that could come later.
All right, let's continue on. Why don't you rattle off some more of the resistant weeds and I'll throw out
Well,
the
the
best
toughest
thing.
one, Brian, that I can think of right now is kochia. And that's new for a lot of guys because they've been doing a great job bringing it down with Roundup. But all of a sudden we've got some areas that it's just not working anymore. What can you even do?
Cobra is probably the best thing there. FlexStar would have some activity, but I would say Cobra is best.
Okay, then we look at giant ragweed. That one is getting to be
both
a
giant
huge problem.
both giant and common. First rate would be the best thing. FlexStar would be number 2, and number 3 would be Cobra in my book.
Okay, well, you know, you look at other weeds that may or may not be resistant, like even velvet leaf is getting to be a tough one, and it grows fast.
Yeah, but velvet leaf is easy because you can go out there with Resource or Cadet, and you're going to absolutely annihilate that, even great big velvet leaf, so no big deal, and those products are pretty inexpensive.
Okay, the other thing that we're running into this year is we're seeing more mare's tail that's coming in the spring. You know, it used to just be that winter annual. It started in the fall. We'd either wipe it out with tillage or with our first shot of burn down or whatever in the spring. Now we've got some mare's tail that's popping up in crop.
For a single product, first rate would be the best. If you want to do a combination, something we've had okay luck with on our farm is a combination of FlexStar and Classic. So either way, whichever way you go, you're not going to get 100%, but it's not bad.
But here again, you're mentioning different products for almost every weed
That's
we're
right.
talking
That's
about.
right.
How do you put together a program then if I've got 3 of those different weeds?
You have to put them all together. Just talk to your agronomist because sometimes all 3 may be able to go together, sometimes not. The other concern is what you're going to do with adjuvants. So maybe you want crop oil with one thing, but oh, if I put something else in the tank, now I got to cut back to non-ionic surfactant. How's that going to affect everything? It really varies.
Well, adjuvants is one thing, Brian, but what about spray tips? When we're talking about spraying straight Roundup, we like those drift reduction type tips when we've got a little bit of a breeze out there just to make sure we don't have problems. But now we're talking about some of these products, like you were saying, Harass. Well, that's a contact weed killer. We've got to have great coverage. We have to have small droplets that are going to completely coat that weed if we want to have good luck. And you can't do that if you're spraying it with Roundup and you're completely worried about drift. So you may consider using flat fan nozzles or at least being able to switch to them. You may have to spray at different times of the day to try and completely avoid the wind as much as possible. Just a lot of different considerations there.
Okay, the last resistant weed I can think of would be wild buckwheat. Whether you want to call it resistant or not, Roundup's just not very good on it. The very best thing would be Pursuit. FlexStar also has pretty good activity. Pursuit not only will kill it when it's already up, but it does leave real good residual too.
Well, that's sure a lot of different weeds there and a lot of different herbicide choices. So when you're talking about broadleaf weed control, make sure you're talking to your agronomist in your local area about what you can do about the weeds you guys have in the crops that we're talking about.
Well, the other thing is just download the free iPad, iPhone, smartphone app that we've got. It's called Field Guide. You can look up Ag PhD or Field Guide and you'll find that app out there. Again, it's free, and then you can go under all these different weeds that we talked about and look at our best recommendations for corn, soybeans, wheat, and we also have some other information in there too.
Yeah, and you might even find some information about our weed of the week. Can you identify this week's weed?